Revenge of the Cybermen was the fifth and final serial in Season 12, released in 1975, and was the first appearance of the iconic villains, the Cybermen, since the invasion in Season 6 in late 1968. The writer for this story, Gerry Davis, was the co-creator of the Cybermen alongside Kit Pedler when making the 10th Planet back in 1966. With Gerry Davis writing the Cybermen and the legendary Robert Holmes script editing, then that should mean that Revenge of the Cybermen would be a breeze to write and would automatically be a ratings hit. However, no one could have expected what happened behind the scenes. From script rewrites by Bob Holmes to a ghost sighting and a supposed curse which still emanates from the story today. Let's have a look at the troubled production of Revenge of the Cybermen.
You've no home planet, no influence, nothing. You're just a pathetic bunch of tin soldiers skulking about the galaxy in an ancient spaceship.
A tear? Sarah Jane?
On the 28th of December 1974, the future of Doctor Who changed forever. This day marked the airing of the first episode of Robot, which was the introduction to the Fourth Doctor, played by Tom Baker. As soon as he first appeared on screen, he was absolutely loved by audiences, and helped to sustain the future of the show for a long time. The first 3 seasons with Tom, produced by Philip Hinchcliffe, were a ratings juggernaut, consistently cracking more than 10 million overnight audiences, week after week. Tom stayed on for a whopping 7 years, and a long tenure, plus the immense popularity at the start of it, helped to elevate the show to a British household icon. No matter your thoughts on the Fourth Doctor, you can't deny what he did for the show. However, at the start of his tenure, things were very different. Jon Pertwee, the previous Doctor, was also immensely popular with audiences, so when Pertwee chose to leave the show in 1974, the BBC were worried what the audience would think of the new Doctor. To help combat this, the writers decided that Tom's first season will have his Doctor fight off against the 3 big monsters. They did this so the audience can see how this new Doctor fought off against familiar foes. These monsters were the Sontarans, the Daleks, and of course, the Cybermen. In May 1974, producer Barry Letts and script editor Terence Dicks commissioned Gerry Davis to write a new Cyberman story. They knew that Gerry would do a good job, seeing as he co-created the Cybermen alongside Kit Pedler. After Letts and Dicks commissioned the story, it was down to new producer Philip Hinchcliffe and new script editor Robert Holmes to bring the story to life. Davis soon began work on this serial and reused a lot of story beats from the Moon base, because both feature the Cybermen taking over a human base and using some sort of plague. The main difference is that the Cybermats were the ones which carried the plague in Revenge, instead of sugar in the coffee in the Moon base. The original story was meant to be set on a casino space station, where it was gamblers who were killed off by the Cybermats space plague. The scripts were then commissioned by Robert Holmes, who denied the scripts. As a cost-cutting measure, it was requested that the setting would be the Nerva Beacon, which was also used in the Ark in Space previously in Season 12. Davis rewrote his scripts to replace the space casino with the Nerva Beacon, and hoped that Holmes would like it. Holmes, once again, said no. He felt that the scripts were slightly immature for the new darker and more gritty tone the show was going for at that point. Due to this, Holmes decided to rewrite the scripts himself. The final draft, which was used in the aired story, was very different to what Davis wrote, so much so that the story may as well have had nothing to do with Davis. However, he was still credited as the sole writer. You may be wondering what was so different between Davis's original script and Holmes's rewritten one. Luckily for fans, we don't have to wonder. In March 2021, the company Big Finish, who's well known for writing audio plays, decided to adapt Davis's original script into an audio production known as Return of the Cybermen. This adaptation still didn't have the space casino idea, but it was still very different from the transmitted story, and I actually have the CD right here for me to talk about some of the major differences.
Big Finish presents Return of the Cybermen by Gerry Davis, as the Doctor, Sarah and Harry return to Space Station Nerva to find something sinister waiting for them.
let's start with arguably the biggest difference between the two. The Vogons are nowhere to be heard in Return of the Cybermen, which, thank goodness, as they are so boring in Revenge. Instead of the Vogons, Return instead has a bunch of miners on an asteroid of gold, but they only appear in one episode, and actually have a really interesting and dark backstory compared to the Vogons in Revenge, who basically took over the story after the halfway mark. Fun fact, Philip Hinchcliffe doesn't like the Vogons at all, so I think he would have preferred Return. Another difference was the way the Doctor was written. Obviously, these changes were down to the fact that those making Return of the Cybermen knew exactly what Tom Baker's Doctor was like throughout his entire era, so I suppose I can't fault Revenge of the Cybermen for that. However, in Return, I felt like the Fourth Doctor was a lot more likeable, and he took the situation a lot more seriously, which he didn't do in Revenge, and that is one of my major criticisms with the original story. Furthermore, the Doctor figures out that the Cybermen are behind the attack by using his 500-year diary and remembering the Cybermats from stories like Tomb of the Cybermen and The Wheel in Space, to name a few. And I thought that was just a nice bit of continuity, and made more sense than the Doctor figuring everything out just by seeing Voga in Revenge. Another plot point which was ironed out was the cure for Sarah after she was attacked by a Cybermat, as the Doctor had to get it by asking the Cyber Leader in Return, whilst in Revenge, Sarah is cured by going through a transmat beam. There are many other differences, but they are a lot smaller, but I'd recommend Return as it is a significant improvement over Revenge, and it's just a great story to boot. Although, be warned, the iconic line, "Harry Sullivan is an imbecile!" is actually nowhere to be seen.
You'll be intrigued. See the 7 wonders of Wookiee Hole and
You'll be bewitched.
Obviously, script writing woes are quite common in Doctor Who stories. The arc in space earlier in the season also had a lot of script rewrites due to the original writer, John Lucarotti, who you may know for writing stories like The Aztecs, Marco Polo and The Massacre, having limited contact with Holmes due to being in Corsica, so Holmes decided to just write the story himself. However, the reason I wanted to talk about Revenge of the Cybermen is because the script rewrites are just the tip of the iceberg to what happened when filming the story. Michael E. Bryant was chosen to direct this serial because of his previous works in Who, like in The Sea Devils and The Green Death. He was even the one who came up with the idea for the sonic screwdriver when he was a production assistant for Fury from the Deep. A few weeks before directing the story, Michael went on a trip with his family to Wookiee Hole Caves in Somerset. When thinking of places to film the scenes on the Vogan planet, Bryant remembered Wookiee Hole and felt like it would work, so the location filming began in the caves in November 1974. Before filming began, Bryant wanted to explore Wookiee Hole himself to have some ideas of shots. However, the managers of the caves couldn't close it to the public during the day just so Bryant could have a look around. However, they could let him have a look around from 6 to 10 PM after the caves closed to the public. The only catch was that Michael would be locked in the cave in the complete darkness, aside from his torch and a few lights the manager left out. I honestly have no idea why the caves had to be locked, as the manager was still nearby, but I imagine it was probably for security reasons. After a few hours, Michael had a lot of great shots, but then he heard what seemed to be the door opening. Michael was obviously confused, as the manager had said that he would be alone and no one else would come in, so Michael decided to see who it was. What he saw was a diver holding an air tank walking into a big pond in the middle of the cave. The manager soon let Michael out and was confused to hear about the diver, as he knew for a fact that no one went in.
You let somebody in, somebody walked in. And he said, well, what do you mean somebody walked in? And he said, no, nobody's been in, that's secure, it's locked, I can see it, it's locked, it's not open.
However, only 3 weeks before, a young diver was exploring the caves and sadly drowned. Since then, many people had seen him in the caves, and he supposedly doesn't like being disturbed. No one truly knows whether this ghost sighting is real or not, aside from Michael E. Bryant himself. Who knows? The ghost diver may still haunt the caves. Have fun sleeping tonight if you're going to Wookiee Hole tomorrow. See ya! On to another supernatural entity now. We've already talked about ghosts. Now let's talk about the Witch of Wookiee Hole and the curse she brought. Wookiee Hole is really dark and cramped, as you can see from these behind the scenes videos, so the caves were definitely a little bit spooky for the cast and crew there. It was especially tough for those in the Cybermen suits, as the actors were already tall, but they also had big bulky helmets and tall boots, which really doesn't work well in the small tunnels. Michael E. Bryant was even worried that he'd have to get the Cybermen to crawl, which obviously would look quite silly. Luckily, that didn't happen. The filming was also really tough for the crew with claustrophobia, as there were many who had to constantly get out of the caves to get fresh air just so they could calm down. Claustrophobia was nothing to what happened next though. The Witch of Wookey Hole is a story often told in tours to the caves. This is because one of the stalagmites looks a little bit like a witch. Down in the cave, Michael's wife took some arrowheads home with her, and if you've seen the movies, then you know that witches hate stuff being taken. Furthermore, some of the crew when filming thought it would be funny to dress up the stalagmite in witches' costumes by putting on a black hat and a cape around it, and they also decided to give it a broom. Everyone thought it was funny and nothing more than a practical joke, but many people think that these two events are what provoked the supposed witch. Only an hour afterwards, one of the crew who put on the clothes slipped off a rock and broke his leg. Another crew member also fell off a ladder and badly injured himself, and another crew member fell ill. A few hours after that was the infamous incident which almost killed Elizabeth Sladen, who played Sarah Jane. In one scene, Sarah has to get on a boat and ride across the water. However, when Liz got on the boat, it sped off out of control and Liz couldn't stop it. The boat started heading towards one end of the cave really quickly. Michael E. Bryant described it as this.
And it drives her towards a very sloping roof where it is going to crunch her head and then drag her down underneath into the thing, underneath into one of the deep wells.
Obviously, if Liz did hit the roof, then she would have been killed instantly. But luckily, she jumped out of the boat just in time. Tom Baker's stuntman, Terry Walsh, who you'll most likely see in the Sontaran experiment after Tom broke his collarbone, was watching the whole thing, and as soon as the boat went out of control, he jumped into the water and saved Elizabeth after she leapt out of the boat. Sadly, Terry soon became very ill due to the cave water. Many people believe that the crew were cursed because of the clothes and the arrowheads, and because of that, Michael demanded that his wife put the arrowheads back. I'm personally not one to believe in curses, but I can't deny that it is weird that all of this happened on the same day, and only after the crew performed actions which would have provoked a supposed witch. After filming was done in the caves, production began on the studio footage, which was filmed in the same set as the Ark in Space, as I previously mentioned. Production unit manager, George Galaccio, commented on the repurposed set, and said this.
Designers were always encouraged to reuse things. There were lots of corridors on Doctor Who. It was always run down there, pause while a wall is removed, then run back up there. But the programme got facilities and more or less what it wanted. It wasn't looked down on in any way. For all its cheapness, Doctor Who was one of the BBC's most successful programmes.
I think that quote shows why the show works so well despite a small budget, and I just wanted to use it in this video. Luckily, the studio filming didn't have too many problems, and, fun fact, the radio transmitter which Coleman used, which was disguised as a clothes brush, was the same prop which appeared in the 1973 Bond movie, Live and Let Die. Roger Moore handed over the prop to the BBC in 1973, and was paid very little for it. Roger said that he was paid 2 shillings and a sixpence, which in the 70s was a very tongue-in-cheek way of saying practically nothing. It probably would have paid for a cheap coffee back in the 70s. Here's the full quote by Roger Moore.
I'd popped into the Beeb for a cup of tea and spotted a notice about an upcoming Doctor Who, so I thought the darlings would be so cash-strapped they'd need anything they could get their hands on. It wasn't MGM after all. But I didn't expect to walk out with 2 and 6.
Revenge of the Cybermen began airing on the 19th of April 1975 and aired each episode weekly until the 10th of May 1975. The highest viewing figures were for Part 1, with a whopping 9.5 million people watching, and the lowest was for Part 2, which is still really high at 8.3 million. Overall, the story had an average of 9 million viewers, which is very high. Sadly, despite the initial successes of the story, it seems like the curse of Revenge of the Cybermen is still around today. Throughout the 80s and 90s, Doctor Who started to be released on VHS. This was wonderful news to those who could only watch older episodes on increasingly worse looking pirated recordings of those episodes. Despite having a bit of a slow start when it came to release, the Doctor Who VHS market was incredibly popular. And all of this started back with good old Revenge of the Cybermen. Revenge was the first Doctor Who story to ever be released on VHS on the 3rd of October 1983, although it was an omnibus version. The episodic version wasn't released until May 1999. Revenge was chosen as a result of a questionnaire sent out to the attendees of the Doctor Who exhibition at Longleat in 1983, where they would have voted for which story they wanted to see first on VHS. However, the winning story was actually The Tomb of the Cybermen, which was missing at that time. To combat this, the BBC decided to release the earliest surviving Cyberman story at that time, which just so happened to be Revenge of the Cybermen. Overall, the release was incredibly popular. However, the cover isn't very popular nowadays. I should clarify that this cover I'm showing you right now wasn't actually the original one. The original cover was this. I can spot at least 3 things wrong with this cover. First of all, the season's 18 to 21 title sequence and logo is present instead of the season 12 one. However, I can forgive that as a lot of the logos were incorrect on VHS. Next, the image of Tom Baker is actually from season 18 instead of season 12. Once again, I can forgive this as you can't really tell due to the lighting. Then we have this Cyberman. I cannot forgive this. It's the wrong bloody Cyberman! What's worse is the back of the VHS has a screenshot from Earthshock. This is simultaneously ridiculous and hilarious. It reminds me of when everyone was upset over the incorrect master on the Series 3 steelbook, so they removed him from the cover. There's no way a cover like this would be allowed today. Now, I know this may just seem like an innocent mistake by the production team back in the 80s. They didn't have TARDIS Wiki back then to double check facts. Overall, this may not have been a result of the supposed curse. However, this isn't the only problem Revenge of the Cybermen had when coming to home media. There wasn't any problems during the DVD release of the story, other than the fact that someone thought it was a good idea to pair the 2 worst classic Cyberman stories in the same box set. Oh well, that's just my opinion anyway. The Blu-ray release, on the other hand, is another story entirely. Doctor Who The Collection is the name given to the complete season box sets of Classic Who on Blu-ray. At the time of making this video, there has been 11 seasons which have been released in these sets. The very first of these sets released was Season 12, which obviously included Revenge of the Cybermen, and was released in the UK on the 2nd of July 2018. However, the initial release contained various issues. 2 discs contained some errors and needed replacements sent out to various people. The Sontaran experiment was one of the stories included on a faulty disc, and contained some audio issues. The other faulty disc was for, you guessed it, Revenge of the Cybermen. The errors here included a typo in the credits, and a couple of missing special effects shots. Another problem with this release was that it was very popular. Very, very popular. Stupid popular. So much so that there were not enough box sets made to meet the demand, which caused them to sell out really quickly. For a good comparison, those of you in the 90s will remember how hard it was to get a Buzz Lightyear toy.
Back in 1995, short-sighted retailers did not order enough dolls to meet demand.
This was basically the same thing. This ended up leading to scalpers on places like eBay, who would sell these sets for ridiculous prices. All of this meant that many people couldn't even get the box set for a time. Luckily, in early 2020, it was announced that Season 12 would be getting a re-release. After 2 years of many fans sitting with an incomplete collection, they could finally obtain the hard-to-find Season 12 on the 2nd of March 2020. However, even then there were still problems with the set. Certain copies of the 2nd edition had misprinted discs. Whilst all the content was still the same, the discs had the same artwork from the Season 10 collection set. While Season 12 wasn't the only set to have various errors present during release, it is still weird to think that these errors often affected Revenge of the Cybermen, which was a story still believed to be cursed as a result of the witch. Luckily for fans who couldn't get the 2 releases of the set, A standard edition version with different packaging is available to get at any time and will not sell out due to being a standard release. Also luckily, there doesn't seem to be any problems with this release. So, that was Revenge of the Cybermen's rocky road to home media, but that's not the only problem which occurred around the release of the story. In between the airings of parts 1 and 2, on the 23rd of April 1975, William Hartnell, who played the first Doctor, sadly passed away. Furthermore, on the 19th of April 2011, which was the 36th anniversary of Part 1's broadcast, Sarah Jane actress Elizabeth Sladen sadly passed away. As I've said before, I'm not one to believe in curses, so all of this was most likely a coincidence, but it is definitely striking when you notice the links between Revenge of the Cybermen's production and release and other terrible events. Actually, maybe the curse is real. You see, when I tried to get some extra information for this documentary by watching the making of on the Blu-ray, I actually dropped the disc. Thankfully I dropped it on carpet, so it was completely fine. There wasn't even a scratch. Still, it happened when I was trying to watch a documentary about the curse story, so it's gotta be true. So, that was the troubled production of Revenge of the Cybermen. From rewrites upon rewrites to filming dangers and constant issues when being released to home media. The story has had quite a rocky road to get to a placement in most people's collection. With all of the troubles the story went through, was it worth it? Sadly, no. Fan opinion of the story tends to range from being quite middling to quite low. In 2014, Doctor Who magazine ran a poll to figure out the average ranking of every story in Who up until Time of the Doctor. Revenge of the Cybermen ranked at 160 out of 241 stories. Whilst not being a horrendous placement, it is still in the bottom half of the list. I also asked some other people what their in-depth opinions were, and these are some of my favourite responses. And to finish off this video, I will give you my opinion. Thanks for watching, everyone.
Don't forget to click below to subscribe